Their retail prices have soared since 2020, but are we being ripped off even more in 2024 for these same watches? I'm going to uncover if Rolex have been using the inflation excuse to hike prices unnecessarily. But trust me, Omega might be even worse. In the last 4 years, we've faced a global pandemic, soaring inflation, economic uncertainty, and rising living costs. But amid all this, Rolex prices have surged like never before. Are they using the chaos as vindication to fatten their profit margins? So let's peel back the layers to see if the big crown is taking advantage of the times and whether you're getting better value for money or just paying more for the same. Welcome back. Now, there is a prevailing belief amongst humans, it's human nature, to think that things were always better in the past than what they are today. It's called sanitized screen memory, where we tend to look back at the past through rose-tinted glasses. This is very much the same for the watch industry and particularly for retail prices. Now, it is no secret that retail prices have gone up astronomically over the last few years, and we can blame that on a number of issues in the external economic environment, wars going on everywhere. However, there is also a belief amongst the watch community that retail watch prices at authorized dealers have soared well beyond what was necessary. In essence, they have gone up higher than inflation. So let's debunk that myth and find out whether really Rolex are ripping you off even more today than back before all of the chaos. Let's first take a look at the situation here in the UK, and there's no better place as ever to kick off than with the Rolex Submariner and particularly the no date version. The retail price of this in 2020 was £6,450, and today the retail price is £8,050. That represents a real percentage increase in the UK of 24.8%. If we weigh that up against the cumulative UK inflation over that same period, according to the Bank of England, which is 23.1%, then there is a positive variance of 1.7%, which suggests we are paying 1.7% more for that Rolex Submariner today than we were in 2020. Similarly, for the Submariner Date, that was a £7,300 watch in 2020, and today it is a £9,000 watch, a real percentage increase of 23.3%, and compared with general inflation, that is only a variance of plus 2%. So yes, that is above, but really it's negligible to even mention. Let's turn our attention to the GMT Master 2, and particularly we are going to look at the Oyster bracelet versions. Now, this is all versions of the Pepsi, the Batman, the Sprite, or whatever other nicknames you have for those watches. These watches would set you back £7,750 back in 2020, and today they stand at a £9,350 price tag, a percentage increase in the UK of 20.6%, which of course is below the general inflationary figure of 23.1%. So one could argue that in today's world you are actually paying 2.5% less for that same watch. Now, for the Rolex Explorer 2, back in 2020, of course, we had an older reference version of this watch, but generally the watch is almost exactly the same, so I think this is a fair comparison. Back in 2020, that was a £6,650 watch, and now an AD will charge you £8,500 for one of these brand new. So that represents a real percentage increase of 27.8%. Again, weigh that up against the general UK cumulative inflation over that period of 23.1%. You could now argue that a Explorer 2 is costing you 4.7% more in today's world. However, of course, that is a slightly different watch, so potentially that extra premium you are paying there is really represented by the fact that you are getting technically a better watch. Moving on to the Sky Dweller then, all steel references on the Oyster bracelet back in 2020. This would have set you back £11,850, and today the AD list price is £13,850. Interestingly, that only represents a 16.9% real world percentage percentage increase over that time period, which compared against the cumulative inflation figure of 23.1% would suggest that actually you're getting much better value for money by 6.2%. How about the very exciting entry-level group of Rolex watches? This is the Oyster Perpetual line in 41mm sizes. Now, of course, in 2020, this was the collection of the year. The brand new releases of those fancy multicolored dials really captured everybody's hearts. These were watches back then which carried a retail price of £4,700, and today at the authorized dealer those will set you back £5,550, which represents a real percentage increase of only just over 18%. So that price increase is 5% below the general inflation figure. Let's take a look at the C-Dweller 43 in all oyster steel. This particular reference we're going to compare is with the black dial. Now in 2020, this carried a list price of £9,350, and today it is priced at £11,650. That represents a real percentage increase of 24.6%, which of course is 1.5% above the cumulative inflation figure in the UK. Now time for the one you've probably all been waiting for. It is the Daytona 116-500. We're going to compare, of course, with the new 126-500 Allen. This is the ceramic bezel Rolex, which carries a wait list of several years at an authorized dealer. So really these price comparisons are irrelevant anyway, because if you can get one at your AD, you're going to buy it. These watches carry a premium on the secondary market of double the list price, and therefore if we're paying a few percentage more in today's context than we would have been at retail, I think many of us would accept that if we could get it at retail anyway. But for argument's sake, let's look at these figures. In 2020, those watches carried a retail price of £10,350, and today they would set you back £13,200 brand new. That's a 27.5 real percentage increase over that time period, which, not really to my surprise, means that you'll be paying more for that watch today. There has been a new reference since then with a new movement in there. I don't think that new 126-500 reference is anywhere near as nice. It doesn't carry the same curvaceous form and beauty of the 116-500 reference, but that's subjective anyway. In real terms, that would cost you more in today's context than it would have done in 2020 for what is largely the same watch. Let's take a look at one of the most accessible men's 41mm pieces, brand new at your authorized dealer, in particular a Datejust, the basic Datejust 41 with smooth bezel and oyster bracelet. Now for comparison, in 2020 this would have set you back £6,450, and today that price has risen to £7,100. So that only represents a 10.1% increase, which is 13% lower than that general UK cumulative inflation figure, which is quite a lot. Today you would be paying considerably less in real terms for that basic Datejust 41 than you would have been back in 2020. Maybe that represents the fact that because this is the least desirable of the 41mm Datejust at authorized dealers, perhaps Rolex have realized that the future means that they will probably struggle to sell those watches, those Datejusts. I know that we do on the secondary market. Certainly it's very difficult to sell a Datejust that isn't on a Jubilee bracelet and with that fluted bezel. Now let's take this analysis up a notch and make it even more interesting by having a look at the Rolex Day-Date collection. Of course, this is a collection made of entirely solid gold watches. Now, when we talk about that cumulative average inflation figure of 23.1% here in the UK over those 4 years, that represents what's called a basket of goods. It represents an average of those components that make up that inflationary figure. So for example, in that basket of goods we could have food that's gone up by 15% and fuel for cars, petrol prices that have gone up by 40%. Those things average out and reach a cumulative average figure of 23.1%. So when we're talking about gold pieces, it is absolutely important to acknowledge the commodity value change of gold on the markets. And over the last 4 years, the value value of gold has soared enormously by approximately 67.9% since 2020, which is 3 times more than the general inflation figure. So, how much has a day date risen over those 4 years, if it's of course been impacted by that massively inflated gold price? The price in 2020 for a 40mm all yellow gold model was £26,950. Today, they are £35,200, a real percentage increase in price of just over 30%, which of course compared with that general inflationary figure is a little bit higher. It would look like you're paying 7.5% more for that watch today than you were back in 2020. However, we've got to consider that there is that major force at play here of the specific inflation of the commodity of gold. You could argue that actually the value of those watches at retail today actually may even be cheaper than it was back in 2020, and to some degree Rolex perhaps have absorbed that cost and not passed on those costs to the consumer. Similarly, if we have a look at the Rolex Datejust 41 in two-tone, so this is a watch which incorporates the use of steel as well as gold, so to some degree would be impacted by that rise in gold. For a fluted bezel Jubilee version, this would set you back £10,500 in 2020, and today that's a £14,750 watch, an enormous percentage increase of over 40%. So clearly the impact of that soaring gold commodity price is felt on the two-tone models there. However, I think because those profit margins are smaller on the two-tone pieces, they have taken a greater hit and Rolex have absorbed less of that commodity price. So I think to conclude, when we have a look at all of those Rolex pieces I've explored there, the price increase over the last 4 years isn't as bad as what everybody is alluding to. I don't believe it is the case to make a blanket assumption that we are being ripped off more for the same watches in 2024 than we were in 2020, before all of the hype of the watch market and all of that economic turbulence that we've seen. It's clear for some steel watches, yes, we're paying more, particularly for the Daytona. Perhaps to some degree they are taking advantage of the fact that they simply can increase the retail price on that because there's such a long wait list, and I think we will continue to see retail price increases on the Daytona. Why? Because they can. Why? Because they're a business. If we're talking about commodity specific inflation figures, we've spoken about gold, how about steel? It's also worth mentioning that over those last 4 years, steel has risen by considerably more than that 23% average cumulative inflation figure. I suppose in many ways you could suggest that really we're not paying that much more for Rolex watches than we were back in 2020. What's interesting when we have a look at the US retail prices, the Submariner is a $9,100 watch. If we make a conversion of those dollar prices into pounds, it works out that for all of those watches in the United States, you are actually paying much less than us guys in the United Kingdom. For a Submariner converted back to pounds, you're paying £6,916 compared to the £8,050 we're paying. For the ceramic Daytona, my American friends are paying only £11,476 compared to the £13,200 we are paying in the United Kingdom. So it is true that you're paying less for a Rolex in the United States, and comparatively in inflation terms, you're paying even less in 2024 than you were in 2020 when you consider that global gold inflation and global steel inflationary price as well. Anyway guys, I've spoken enough in this video. Let me know what your comments are down below. Be sure to go and check out my website vinnyfrancis.com. Until the next one, take care.